What's up, Eager to Pleasers? Welcome back to another episode of the Eager to Please podcast. To say I'm excited to welcome our next guest is an understatement. And because our friends and supporters at Fresh Starts Registry, I have the pleasure of introducing Virginia-based author, essayist, and freelance writer Heather Sweeney. Her memoir, fittingly called Camouflage, beautifully chronicles her journey as a military wife and stay-at-home mom. But it's been a life built around service, sacrifice, and showing up for everyone but herself. What makes her story so deeply connected to this podcast is the whole premise of what Eager to Please was built on. For years, Heather bent, adapted, and accommodated, putting her needs, dreams, and expectations of others ahead of her own. Until one day, she realized she just slowly disappeared into the background, living as a supporting character in her own story, instead of claiming her place as the lead. Heather, so grateful that you're here. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Natalie. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited for you to share your story, and I'd like to start with that just because it's helpful to see your journey and where you started, how you became an author, and just kind of how you got into writing Camouflage.
Absolutely. Yeah. So should I start from the very beginning?
Very beginning. Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, I did get divorced, as everybody knows, but I do kind of attribute my writing career to being a military spouse. So my marriage was actually a big part of how I became an author, how I became a writer. I got married young. I was 23 when I got engaged, and it was a whirlwind romance. It was very, I guess nowadays they would call it love bombing. That really wasn't a term back then. My daughter taught me that. We got married very young, and right shortly before we got married, he came home and said, "I want to join the military." And I was like, "Oh, well, I don't know anything about the military." I didn't think he really did either. But we were young and in love and hopeful, and we had all these dreams. And I thought, you know what? I will follow you anywhere. So yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Right.
Yeah. So we got married, and we were doing the military life. And it's almost like compare it to motherhood. You have no idea really actually what it's going to be like until you are in the thick of it. You could read all the books, you can interview people, you can ask questions, you can get advice. But until you're actually in it, you just really have no idea what to expect. And it was so much harder than I ever expected. He was gone all the time. He almost missed the birth of our first child. It was a moving around. We lived in Japan, and obviously I don't have any family in Japan, so I'm far from family and a support system. I did a lot of parenting alone. And when I started realizing that things weren't great in our marriage, there really wasn't a lot of resources we could tap into as far as counseling for us to get some help. It really kind of hit me when we were in Japan, and there were counselors there, but in that office where you go to get help, we socialized with them. And it's like, well, that's probably unethical for them, to see us as a, counseling client. Right. But so we kind of pushed things under the rug, and things just kind of spiraled. And I did finally realize I don't really know who I am anymore. And it was my mother-in-law who said, my then husband was about to get deployed to the Middle East. And she said, "Well, why don't you start a blog?" And I think she kind of sensed that something was missing for me. I was a stay-at-home mom, loved my 2 young children, but I was alone, and I would put the kids to bed. And then I'm like, well, what do I do now? I don't really have a partner. I don't want to keep getting a babysitter. I need something, a creative outlet, something. So I'm like, okay. So I started a blog. It was called Riding the Roller Coaster, just because we always say it's such a roller coaster being in the military life. There's ups, there's downs, there's, loop-de-loops that you're not expecting. And the blog got pretty popular, and I ended up getting offered a job at a website writing about pretty much the same things that I was writing about on the blog. And once I had that financial stability, I started realizing that divorce was very feasible, because I think, like most women, I could not leave the marriage because I had nowhere to live. I had nowhere to support no way to support myself financially. I had no childcare that I could afford. As we know, childcare is very expensive.
Oh, expensive.
I mean, I had one job that if I had not been married, the childcare costs were more than, my paychecks.
Right.
So,
yeah. It's sad, but true. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so all of my writing was basically about being a military spouse and the hardships, but there were also positives too. It wasn't all bad. I loved living in Japan. That was a fantastic experience for me. And so when I started realizing that this divorce was going to happen, I thought, well, I'm not going to have anything to write about. All I write about is being a wife and supporting his career and just this whole military community. And when in the state of Virginia, you have to be separated for an entire year if you have kids before the divorce can be finalized, which is a really, really long time, which it blows my mind. But my ex-husband had asked me, could you please not write about this for the year that we're separated? And at first I was like, I can do whatever I want. Don't tell me what to do. But I actually agreed to it because I thought maybe this is a good thing. And going back later and looking at my journals, because I journaled just like crazy, I'm so glad that I did not publish anything in that first year because it was just so raw and ugly and bitter and resentful and all of these things that I needed to work through myself. I needed to work through in therapy. And, I didn't want my kids to ever see that. They were young at the time, but I'm like, at some point they're going to Google me. And of course, at some point my kids did Google me. And so I just never wanted anybody to come back and say, I can't believe you published that. That was really awful. So I spent that year just completely journaling. And then I started realizing, well, I can write about other things. I can write about women's health. I had a hysterectomy, so I wrote about that. I started writing about just parenting and, life as a former athlete. I have so many different dimensions to myself that I don't have to focus my entire writing career on this one title, one hat that I wore.
Right.
And so I started writing more and more about the divorce. And then I wasn't really thinking about writing a memoir. And then one day I wrote this article and it was called 5 Marriage Tips from a Divorced Military Spouse. And it just got this wonderful response from military spouses, some of whom were getting divorced, and said, thank you so much for writing about this. Nobody writes about military divorce. Nobody talks about military divorce. And others were in a military marriage who were going through some rocky times and said, thank you so much. This is wonderful advice. I would do anything not to get divorced. And then others were saying, please write a book about this, or please write more about this. Nobody's talking enough about this. And so that's where the book came in. I said, well, nice. They say you should write the book that you want to read. And I really, at the time during my divorce, really, really wanted to read some other stories of military divorces, and I couldn't find anything. So that was a really long way of telling you how I became an author.
Well, I love it. Well, I love that you took matters into your own hands, and sometimes we have to do that. If
Absolutely.
we can't find the resources, maybe we need to be the resource for someone else. So
Absolutely.
I love that you've kind of used your own journey to chronicle that for other people. And as a writer myself, I particularly love the title Camouflage because I know it's got double meaning, being a military spouse, but also camouflaging yourself, hiding behind the name and the title mom or wife or whatever it is. But knowing what you know now and all the work that you put into finding happiness again out of a dark time in your life, what would be your top? Well, I know you wrote an article on the top 5. So let's do that. What would be your top 5 pieces of advice that you would go back and give yourself or to a friend who maybe is experiencing this now that you've learned?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to that article. But I know one of the things was definitely go to counseling before it becomes the last resort. And for us, by the time we found ourselves in counseling, we actually saw 3 marriage counselors over the span of about a year. And the third one, we kind of didn't even count the third one because I think we went to 2 sessions and she had to separate us. We were very angry with each other at that point. And but I think I don't think we were meant to be married. I think that no matter what, whether he was in the Navy or not, whether we had gone to counseling or not, we would have gotten divorced at some point. But it was a last resort. And so when we went to our first counselor, I was already 1 foot out the door. I was practically packing a suitcase. I had said to him, I am done. I cannot do this anymore. And then that's when he was kind of like, well, I'll find a counselor. And granted, he got us in the very next day to see a counselor who was employed by the Navy. And that's a whole other story because she was not advocating for me 100%. She was definitely making sure that his mental health was the priority.
Right.
Yes. But yes, so I think that if you have this kind of gut feeling that something is not right in your marriage, go to counseling. I don't think there is kind of maybe a stigma still. I mean, back then for me, this was, 2010-ish. There was a bit more of a stigma, especially for people in the military who are supposed to be so resilient and outwardly strong, physically, mentally, tough. But in general, I think the stigma is really so much less about going to counseling than it used to be. And so why not, find a counselor? There are a lot of different ways to find them these days. You could do it online. And for us, it was just too late. And part of it was because we were in this cycle of, when do we talk about the hard things that are troubling us? So you don't want to get into these hard conversations when he's about to get deployed because you're supposed to be preparing and you're supposed to be spending quality time together with the kids and all the family together. But then you don't want to have these hard conversations while he's gone because, well, he's gone and you can't have these discussions over text message because tone gets misinterpreted or email. So it's like, okay, well, let's talk about when he gets home. But when he gets home, it's like, ooh, this is a homecoming. We're supposed to make up for lost time and the holidays and the birthdays that were missed and things like that. I mean, we were separated sometimes for 6 months at a stretch. And so there's jet lag, there's all of these factors. And he's, when he would come back from deployments, he's trying to get used to living with a family again. And we're trying to fit him back into our schedule because I worked so hard to be I was a single mom while he was gone. And, as you've got kids that you have to have schedules, especially when they're younger. And then all of a sudden he comes home. It's like, okay, well, now we need to wait till he comes home from work to have dinner. And this is our bath time and this is our nap time. And so it's an adjustment for the whole family. So you don't want to hash out these problems during that. And then there were times when he would come home and we would barely unpack and do his laundry when it's like, hey, I got to go again. So when do you talk about these things? So it's very hard for military families. And I often tell people another piece of advice, you have to know how to communicate with your partner because when you are apart for so much of your marriage, it's all about how you can communicate. It's a long distance relationship. And communication was never our strong suit. We were very young when we got married. We were both at that point 24. And we just didn't know how to do that. And we never prioritized, doing that and talk about, people pleasing. And like, I wanted to be a good wife, whether he was in the military or not. I'm like, I'll support you. I want to do whatever needs to be done. And so it was very eager to please. I wanted to be that person who was easy to live with. I wanted to be the cool wife. And so, so another bit of advice, learn how to communicate, hone those skills. They are so, so very important. But I think another thing is don't do it alone. And I think for me as a military spouse, our first duty station was in Pensacola, Florida. And at the time I was getting my master's degree. And I have to admit, I didn't hang out with a lot of the military spouses. We did sometimes. We called it mandatory fun. And, there were certain events that you had to go to as a wife and there were potlucks and things like that. But I never really, had a lot of close military spouse friends. And it really kind of bit me in the ass later on when he got deployed and I'm alone and nobody's checking in on me. He didn't deploy with a unit. It was an individual augmentee situation where he deployed on his own and joined a different command in the Middle East. And so where was my community? And I had civilian friends from my graduate program from the university, but none of them were military spouses. And so nobody really knew how to support me and I didn't have family nearby. So don't do it alone. Same with getting a divorce. It's kind of the same advice. Don't you do your divorce alone. Don't do military spouse life alone. So yeah, hopefully, that's definitely advice that I would give to myself looking back. Yeah,
absolutely. When did you start realizing? Because I'm in the same boat as you. I got married young. I almost feel like, when you are young, you don't really know who you are as a person, especially if you start dating right out of college, or even when you're in high school. You don't hear of the high school sweethearts too often anymore. But when you're so young and you're committing yourself to someone, you bank on growing together. And sometimes one person's growing exponentially and the other's not, or maybe they're happy with the way things are, but you're not. So there's a lot of different variables. But when did you start realizing that this people pleasing aspect was sneaking into your marriage and to motherhood? And, how did you put a name to that?
Oh gosh, it was very gradual. And I think that I ignored a lot of those gut feelings and intuition. I think it hit me the first time we talked about divorce was because he told me he wanted a divorce. We were living in Japan. Our second child was about, I want to say 8 months old. And we had already just bought a house in Virginia. We were about to leave Japan. So we didn't have much time left, but I was a stay-at-home mom and didn't have a job, living overseas. And he came home. It was my birthday.
Oh my
yes, this is one of the chapters in the book that a lot of people ask me about. Yeah, it was, it kind of hit me out of nowhere, but it kind of didn't. Deep down, I kind of knew it was coming.
Right.
And in fact, when he said he wanted a divorce, I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I didn't ask why. My first thoughts were, where am I going to live? What kind of job am I going to get? Where are the kids going to go to childcare? It was all logistical things. I was not devastated at the thought of living my life without this man. It was, how do I rebuild my life when he leaves me? Yeah. And we ended up working through that. And I'm not sure if he was ever really serious or if he was just kind of throwing it out there. We never really talked about it again until we had our next, what I call divorce talk. But that was a wake up call for me to prepare myself. But it was also admitting to myself, wow, he's really unhappy, but I'm really unhappy too. And I guess I didn't realize the extent to which both of us were unhappy in this marriage, because if he had kind of taken next steps to pursue divorce at that moment, I would have wanted it too. I just would have, needed some help. And I really again, like I said earlier, so many reasons why I was scared of life after divorce and why I stayed as long as I did is that I just had no way to support myself. Yeah. And that was a wake up call for me to be like, oh, wow, my entire life, my adult life has gone towards, supporting his career and relying on him for everything, for my identity, for my finances, just everything. I felt very unprepared to jump into the world without him because I'd been, standing behind him for so long. And so, maybe shortly after that is kind of when I started a career again. I had gotten my master's in elementary education. And that's another struggle of military spouses is holding down a career. How were you supposed to do that when you're constantly moving around? And so when we were in Pensacola, Florida, I got my master's degree. And then we went to Japan where I couldn't work for 3 years. So I've got this huge gap in my resume. Right. And then we moved to Virginia and I thought, this is great. Virginia and Florida have reciprocity when it comes to certification for teachers. But, oh, great. I've got to take these 3 exams. They cost money. It took me a year to do this. And then I'm looking for jobs. It takes me another 6 months to get a job. And then, well, guess what? We're rotating in another year and a half. Well, who's going to hire me when they know I'm going to be leaving. But I did end up getting a job. I heard later that everybody who applied for it was a military spouse also.
Oh.
Virginia, I'm in Virginia Beach. We're very highly populated with military. We have several military bases here. And so I did get a job and I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. And then shortly after that was when I started the blog. And then I was able to get a higher paying job writing. And so, yeah, it was little baby steps towards realizing that I need to find my own voice. I need to step out of his shadow. I need to stop hiding behind him and realize I am my own person. I'm not just a mom. I'm not just a wife. I'm not just a military spouse. I have these things that are pretty cool. You know, I have a voice and I'm able to hold down a career. Yeah. And so, yeah, it took many years though. And I did feel stuck for a while, but I think it was just these baby steps that led to this one aha moment. I'm like, I'm ready. It's time to go.
Yeah. So much of that I relate to because I remember getting the keys to my own place. And it wasn't because, like you said, yes, you mourn the loss of a marriage because, you know, no one gets married to get divorced. You don't enter into it thinking, okay, we're going to just try to make it work. And you enter into it because you committed to it. Right. But when it doesn't work, you know, all the feelings of failure and, you know, desperation and sadness. I walk into my own place and I just sat on the floor crying. And I'm like, how am I going to make this work? And then I realized, you know, after I'm talking myself off the ledge, I'm like, Natalie, you've done every single one of these, you know, things on your own for so long. You took care of the kids and did the grocery shopping and the doctor's appointments and all this stuff. And I was working at that point part-time anyway. It was just a matter of how am I going to go back to work full-time and still manage the home life, which obviously I'm doing. But I think it was just the overwhelming feeling of, holy smokes, this is like, you know, everything you do now, you don't even have to really consider. I mean, I kind of do just because our kids are still a little bit smaller and we still have to co-parent, but your decision is your decision now. You don't have to, you know, make sure that he's happy and doing what he needs to do and is on the right path for work. And that was one of our biggest things is when I took a step back from advancing my career, like you said, you have this huge career gap. You feel worthless when you head back into the workforce because it's not because you're not capable. I feel like I'm a capable person and I can learn, but there are all these, you know, young whippersnappers coming up behind you who are fresh out of college and they're probably cheaper than you because, you know, you're supposed to be this, you know, advanced professional or whatever. But it was all of that packaged into one, just trying to figure out, okay, you are worthy. You're going to find something and it'll be fine.
Absolutely. And I think that also when I did finally go back to work, I taught kindergarten for 2 years. I think, you know, I remember sitting him down and saying, okay, well, I'm going back to work after being a stay-at-home mom for 6 years. So I'm going to need some help, right? So all of the things that I was doing, you know, the grocery shopping, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, all of the, you know, taking the kids to doctor's appointments, things like that, I was doing all by myself because I'm like, well, that's kind of my job as a stay-at-home mom, right? So I said to him, I'm going back to work now. I've got work hours just like you do. I've got meetings just like you do, things like that. And I said, you're going to have to do some help. Sometimes you're going to have to get some groceries. Sometimes you're going to have to throw in a load of laundry. And he's like, oh yeah, great. Well, guess what? It never happened. So even when I went back to work and I'm earning a paycheck, which, you know, we didn't need, it was supplemental at the time, but I was thrilled to do it. But I was still doing all of the things around the house, the household chores that I was already doing when I wasn't working. And so then that was another kind of wake up call. Like, you know, if I'm so scared of life after divorce and being a single mom, I already am one. And I have been one for a really, really long time because of the military. And then I did have this wake up call, like the military life really trained me for life after divorce. I know how to be lonely. I know how to pack up and move. I know how to parent the kids by myself. I know how to be alone and not have a +1 when I'm going to a party or whatever. And so that was another plus for me, that I had really been doing so many of these things already. And it kind of is this, I was the one to leave. So we did an in-house separation for 7 horrible months. And then I finally moved into an apartment across town with the kids. And it was so liberating for me. And it was the first time I'd ever lived alone. Yes, I was living with the kids, but it was the first time my name was on the lease. And I was responsible for all the utilities, which was very empowering, because I thought, well, I went from my parents' house to college roommates to another roommate to living with him. And so everything that I was scared of, yes, it was kind of scary to do these things, but at some point I did realize this is awesome. I don't have to, pick up his underwear from 2 inches away from the hamper, and I don't have to cook meals that he likes and I don't, because I'm pleasing him, because he likes these meals. I remember, I have this recipe box. I cook a lot, and I have this recipe box, and there were so many meals in there that I would cook for him because he loved them. These were typical staple meals. Like, he's coming home from deployment. These are the 5 first meals I'm going to cook. I remember just tearing up the recipes and saying, I'm never going to cook this ever again, because I'm like, I don't like this meal. The kids aren't eating this stuff. Why am I making this? So yeah, that was pretty liberating too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also want to just give you kudos for this too, because you had posted this on your Instagram that you made a bucket list, I guess, of things whenever you were finally your own individual again. Yeah. And you took a trip by yourself, which I'm so envious of. I feel like that's still something that I'm afraid to do. Even sit at a bar and eat dinner by myself. I feel like I'm still like,
that was a hard one for me. Going to a restaurant by myself, that was tough.
Yes. Just because, I don't know, you put stories in your head and you're like, oh, they look so sad and lonely, but maybe they're not, maybe they're totally happy just sitting there eating a meal in peace and quiet. But I give you so much credit for going on a vacation by yourself. I think that's
it was amazing. I do highly recommend it. And the only reason I was able to do that was because the kids were with their father. And this was, another thing with military life. I wrote an article about this, that child custody is an absolute mess, because we'd been divorced, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, something like that. And he got stationed in Hawaii. Well, I wasn't moving to Hawaii. I was in Virginia. Right. And so we had to figure out this awful plan, which broke my heart, that the kids would stay with me during the school year. And then during the summers, they would spend the summers in Hawaii. So 10 weeks away from my babies, which I'd never been apart from them for that long. And I did seek legal counsel to see if I could fight that in any way. And it wasn't worth the fight. And I said, this is a man who wants to spend time with his children. Who am I to say that he can't? And so, and the kids had a blast in Hawaii. Who doesn't want to go to Hawaii for a summer? But so, yes, I had planned this trip. I went to Turks and Caicos by myself for an entire week. Of course, I was on a budget, so I stayed in this. I did not stay at a resort. I was at this little kind of inn that was a little bit of a walk to the beach, but it was amazing. They knew that I was by myself. They told me the safe places to go. They helped me. I couldn't afford to rent a car. They told me they helped me rent a bike. Nice. So I biked around the island. I still keep in touch with people that I met on vacation. In fact, one man I met on vacation, he and his wife had approached me because they saw me taking selfies, and they said, do you want us to take a picture of you? And I kept in touch with them, and I ended up mailing them a signed copy of my book, because they were both, they were so supportive of my writing career. Awesome. But yeah, I highly recommend it. It was so, I know I keep using this word empowering, but in our marriage, he planned all the vacations. He picked where we went. He picked the hotels. Wow. And we went to some really cool places, but I thought, I want to pick where we go. I want to pick where we stay. I want to pick what we do. I don't necessarily want to, we are actually very, very different people. Like I said, we would have gotten divorced anyway, but we didn't have a lot of the same interests. And I wanted to do certain things. I wanted to go on a snorkeling excursion, which I did. And so, it was very cool to be able to make decisions for myself and realize things that I want to do. And the bucket list really helped me. I ran a marathon. Nice. I did that vacation by myself. I started taking guitar lessons. And,
nice. Love that.
I started writing a novel, which I've actually gone back to now that I've finished the memoir. It was just so many of these little things. I went to the movies by myself on a date night. I think I was the only single person there. So there were just these little things. I loved having that list to get me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And like, just ask myself, why not? Why not do these things?
I think that's amazing. Yes.
Yeah. I highly recommend.
For sure. I got to work up enough courage to do that, because I feel like I'm still in that. It's been almost 3 years, I feel like, since my divorce. And I'm still in the phase where I'm not necessarily afraid to talk about it anymore, because I definitely was for the first year, actually probably 2 years, where I didn't want to say something just because of the stigma that comes along with being divorced. And I feel like that kind of follows you around. But all that to say is, this year, I think is my focus is working on the sense of community, because I shut myself off pretty much from the world. And I'm like, I don't want to see girlfriends. I don't want to go out. I don't want to do anything. I just need to figure out who I am, what I want to do.
Absolutely. And you really do. You can't do divorce alone. And I'm so thankful for the friends that were answering the phone in the middle of the night when I was spiraling and couldn't sleep. And my family was amazing. My brother flew in to help me move into the apartment. And I just had so many people who had my back. And you really need that, because going back to that term roller coaster, divorce is a roller coaster. And, I know a few people going through divorce right now, and I always tell them, feel your feelings, because one day or even 1 hour, you're going to be super mad and pissed off. And then the next moment you're like, oh, wait, I'm feeling great. I've got this place to myself, and I'm going to kick my feet up and do things that, she didn't let me do. And all of these things. And I think that you've just got to have people that will listen to that. Don't even sometimes I didn't even need a pep talk. I just needed to get the brain vomit out, get this out of my head, because it's circling at 2:00 in the morning and I can't keep thinking about this. So community is so important.
For sure. I'm learning that, and talking with Una too. I know we had mentioned that before we hopped on. She said the same thing. Community is huge. You can't isolate yourself. And that was one of my biggest things, is that I would shove everything down. And I didn't want anyone to know that something was wrong, because you have to portray this. You're good. And you're not good. I'm really not good. Right. So, circling back here, one of the topics that I've addressed heavily in other episodes, in fact, I even wrote a song about it called Boundaries, and all the things that's related to, setting healthy ones and communicating them clearly and navigating the guilt that's associated there. I'd love to know what that looked like for you, and when you finally had to, quote unquote, disappoint other people, so to speak, in order to stop disappointing yourself. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really great question, because I think that I had a really hard time setting boundaries. Again, when you're in a military marriage and one person is definitely the priority. I mean, my whole life revolved around him and his career. And I just thought, I can't set any boundaries. And military life is so unexpected too. There were so many times he'd call me up, hey, I was supposed to leave in 2 days, but now I'm leaving in 2 hours. We need to get to the airport now. And so I couldn't, in my marriage, there really were no boundaries, because I'm like, okay, well, I have to drop everything for him at any given moment. And I think I really learned about the importance of boundaries during the divorce. And one of those really important ones was, and this is a very specific one, but I always tell my divorce friends, put everything in writing.
There were
so many times. I think that my ex, we had a very amicable divorce. It was an uncontested divorce. We went to court exactly once, and that was the day that it was finalized. We did not argue over any material items. Sure, we argued, over certain things, over little details. But because he continued to stay in the military, I had to continue to be flexible. There were certain times, like before he got stationed in Hawaii, he got stationed in DC. So he was commuting from Virginia Beach to DC every weekend. So we had to shift instead of, Friday night to Sunday night, the kids would be with him Saturday morning to Monday morning, which meant he had to take them to school, which he was not used to doing. And so I needed these things in writing because he thought, oh, we had an amicable divorce, we're going to be friends. Well, I still had some hurt feelings. I was not ready to be friends. And he would pick up the phone and say, well, I need to change this. I'm running late. I hit traffic. There was an accident on the interstate, whatever. I'm like, text me, email me. This is not a phone call. People forget stuff, and I feel like so many, again, with our communication breakdown, and I often say too, the problems that you had in your marriage often follow you in your divorce. And so our communication skills were garbage, I would say. And they continued that way after we got divorced. And the kids are older now. They're both adults, so we don't have to worry about custody or anything. But once I said to him, I'm like, look, we can be amicable, we could be friendly, but I need everything in writing. Stop calling me on the phone and having these serious discussions that involve changes in schedule, financial changes. I want everything in an email or text message so that I could refer back to it. And that protects both of us. That doesn't just protect me. This is not something to favor me. This protects both of us, because what if I say something and you forget? On the phone, let's do everything in writing. And so that was the first time I really set up my boundaries too, and realized, and he listened, things, not all the time, right? But yes, things started happening in writing, and it, even little things, setting a boundary of, I don't want to be friends. I don't want to have a conversation with you about your girlfriend. I want to talk to you about the sneakers of our son that got left at your house and he needs them for PE today, things like that. And so the setting of the boundaries of what, our co-parenting relationship is going to look like. Boundaries are super important. And I learned that the divorce was a very good teacher of boundaries. Yeah.
And just learning new ones, like you said, I think the keeping everything in writing is super, super awesome advice, just because, like you said, my ex-husband is often super forgetful. And it's like, well, I did say that to you. Go back in a text message, or here it is on our Google sheet, this is the date or whatever. And I'm not perfect either, because there are things that I forget. But like you said, I love having that as just the gut check. Go to the schedule. This is where it is. So as a fellow people pleaser, what are some of the things that you found really hard to overcome? And then on the flip of that, what are some strategies that you use to get yourself back on track? I always love to ask this question, because it's one of those things. I feel like people pleasing is one of those things that you can get better at advocating for yourself and trying to put yourself first without being a jerk about it. There is a fine line, but, still staying true to who you are. You're always going to be a helpful person. And that's just the nature of who you are. So I'm curious to see if you have any strategies to help you kind of, put yourself back on track.
Oh boy. I think that it's interesting, because I went a year where one of my resolutions was, I am not going to say yes to anything that doesn't spark joy. Let's bring back, Marie Kondo. So basically, I'm not going to be a yes person. But on the flip side, I've actually, now that the book is out, I've actually turned into, I'm not going to say no to opportunities that I could miss out on. So I think when I was first divorced and learning how to be single, learning how to set boundaries, it was really important for me to learn how to say no, because I think as people pleasers, we say yes to everything. Like, oh, sure, I'll watch your kid for the fifth time when you haven't watched. It's funny because when I lived in Japan, it was I just have such treasured memories from Japan. We were such a tight knit community of military spouses, and we watched each other's kids. And we, hey, are you going to the commissary? It's the military grocery store. Can you pick me up this? I forgot, but I don't want to lug my kids. And so I just love the community there. We played bunko. We did all of these things. But there were so many times I'm like, really, there's this imbalance. Like, I know we're co-oping babysitting, but really, like, you owe me like 5, but I'd continue to say yes. And somebody said, hey, Heather, we need someone to start a bunko group. Why don't you do it? I'm like, oh, okay. Even though I really, really didn't want to and knew nothing about bunko. And so I think I said yes to a lot of things. And especially in the marriage, where he would say, well, let's do this. And I wouldn't want to. And I'd be like, okay, well, he wants to. He's only home for 2 weeks before he travels again. So, okay, I can't even think of an example, like a date night to a restaurant or something like that, or going to a party that I'm like, I can think of something. We went on a date night one time. And again, date nights were very few and far between when he's not home a lot. And then you have to coordinate babysitters. And we'd walked into this bar and he saw a bunch of people that he knew from work. And he's like, oh, let's go hang out with them. And I'm like, no, we're on a date night. Why would we hang out with a bunch of, a table of 5 other guys? And I'm the DD. So everybody else is drinking and I'm drinking water. And so I think for me, it was very important to start saying no, like realize I don't want to do these things. And I'm not going to say yes unless I really want to. So I think no, what's the phrase? No is a complete sentence.
I love it.
Right?
I love it.
You don't have to give an excuse. And I think as a people pleaser, I also feel like if I said no to something, I needed to give someone an excuse. No is a complete sentence. Nobody needs to know why
you're
I'm
saying
not going
no.
to go to. Exactly. And I think people respect that too. Like you have to prioritize your time. Life is busy and, you can't do it all, as I've learned too, because I think as a military spouse, I thought I could do it all. And guess what?
Well, you could for the most part until it wasn't working anymore. Yeah. And then you're like, just no.
Right. Right. But yes, no is a complete sentence.
How has this translated into, because I know that you're in a very healthy, loving relationship now. How has this translated for you in this next phase of your life? Because I'm sure there are lessons learned of things you don't want to repeat or things that you're looking for in a new partner. And, eventually I hope that I am where you are. I'm not there yet, but eventually I hope I get there.
Yeah. When it's right, it's right. Yes. Don't rush it. Like that's what I always say. And, so after the divorce, I stayed in therapy for, a good year. And it was very important to me to realize, what part of the divorce was, possibly on my side, because it takes 2 to get married. It takes 2 to get divorced. I am not blaming him for everything. And it was really important to me to try to work on my communication skills. And that included, learning what I wanted and expressing that. So, if I didn't want to go on a date, I think when I was dating one time, some guy asked me on a date and said, hey, let's go to a hockey game. And I'm like, I don't want to go to a hockey game. I'm sure that's lots of fun for some people, but how about we start off with coffee? So I'm not trapped in a 3-hour game with someone who, I might not like. And we ended up not going on that date. But I think that I learned a lot about myself, and I ended up circling back to parts of my personality that I loved before I got married, and like doing fun stuff. So when I was married, I never in a million years would have gone on vacation by myself. I wasn't planning on running a full marathon. I didn't think that I could take guitar lessons. Guitar is really hard, by the way. It is. And especially when you're older and your fingers aren't used to that. But yeah, I think I learned a lot about myself by staying in therapy, not rushing into the whole dating apps thing, which is a whole other world that I didn't. Girl, I tell you what, I hadn't dated. I was in a relationship before my marriage. And so I hadn't really been in the dating pool since the early 90s. And the internet was Oh my gosh, a lot has changed. But yeah, I'd like to think that I took all of those things that I learned into my next relationship. And while I was dating, I kind of had a dating guru helping me out. And she was like, if you did not have fun on that first date, do not go out on a second date. Why waste your time? And that was such a good lesson for me because when I was dating, I didn't go on a single second date. There were just really bad first dates or some mediocre ones. And I'm like, I just, again, not going to waste my time. And so when I met somebody and had a really good first date that I did not want to end, and when he asked me out on the second date, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't wait. Like I'm giddy, like a teenager. That's when I kind of realized, I'm looking for so many things in another person. And a lot of it is very different than the kind of person that I married, the very different personality traits. And I found someone. He is absolutely wonderful. And I feel very lucky. I feel very fortunate. But I'd like to think that I put in some hard work in order to get there.
Yes, exactly. All of that you just put out in the universe and it's coming back to you. Yeah. Have you ever read The Secret, by the way?
Oh, no, I have not. People have recommended that to me.
That was one of the ones that was recommended to me right after my divorce. And it's the premise is about putting out positivity, and that comes back to you instead of being like, my life sucks and this is happening. And why is it always happening to me? That kind of thing. It's just like trying to flip the script a little bit. And I do believe in that. I really do believe in that when you have a positive outlook on things, it comes back to you. So anyway.
Yeah, that's why I do vision boards. Yeah. Yes. So that helps me too, I think. Yeah.
Well, touching on the whole communication thing, it's a good thing you're really digging into this writing, because I'm sure it's helping you to be able to express yourself. So
absolutely. And I think the whole book comes from about 20 years of journals. I mean, I've always journaled ever since I was, at elementary school with the little lock and key. And it's funny because when we were in Pensacola, we were evacuating for a hurricane. And one of the things that I took was my tub of journals. I'm like, yes, we're evacuating our home. I'm taking my journals. But I'm so thankful that I have them, because I really did work out so many of my emotions. And not just about the divorce, but in so many things, like during the deployments. And I was worried for his safety, and I felt very alone. And I just would sometimes sit and pour a glass of wine and just journal for hours. And I was so glad to have those, because that really is how I process things. And maybe that was part of my communication issues too, is that I felt like, I wrote this down. I got it out of my system. I don't need to verbalize this to my partner. And maybe in a way I kind of thought that he could read my mind about certain things and he couldn't. And I think vice versa, when you're, bottling things up. There were so many times I would bottle things up and we would get in this, and he would too. Right. And then we get in these huge arguments over, I don't know, we don't have any milk in the fridge. And then all of a sudden, the argument was about something much, much bigger than not having milk in the fridge. And so I just worked really hard on that and thinking, okay, well, just because I'm journaling it out doesn't mean that I'm over it, whatever I'm upset about. So yeah, I try to get it out through my writing, but I also, again, try to be more verbal about things. But I'm very thankful for writing, and I highly recommend to anybody going through a divorce to journal. Even if you're worried someone's going to see it, burn it. Right. Write a letter to your ex, get it out of your system, and then burn it. Do a burn letter. And I do think journaling can be very, very beneficial and
100%. I agree with that. That's how I got into songwriting. It's super therapeutic. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Well, I think we've talked on so many good topics today. And Heather, I'm so grateful that you were here to share your story. Thank you again to Olivia and Jenny for introducing us. And they are
awesome.
So awesome.
They're so awesome.
Absolutely. And so
I wish I knew them when I was going through my divorce. I tell you what, I could have used a divorce registry.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
They have a lot of good connections on there. So anytime I can direct people their way, I'm happy to do it. But before I let you go, I always like to see if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you personally would like to share, either about your story or about Camouflage or anything that you think would be relevant to Eager to Please.
Absolutely. I think, we've talked about the importance of community and the importance of just like being great to, giving yourself some grace and not beating yourself up. But I think another really important thing is that, as far as divorce, I think you have to understand that every divorce is different and you shouldn't compare yourself. And I tell this story, when I knew a friend who was getting divorced around the same time as me. And she asked me one time, she said, "Are you planning on going back to your maiden name?" And at that time I'd already been writing under my maiden name. And so I'd already made the decision that yes, I was. So, Heather Sweeney, that is my maiden name. Yeah. And I said, yeah, that's the plan. And I said, "Are you?" And she said, "Oh no, I would never do that to my kids." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." And she said, "Yes, everything in their life is changing. And, I would never do that to them." And I thought, well, that's fine for her. It's very important for her to not go back to her maiden name. But for me, it was very important, and to each their own. Right. And so I learned it's really important just not to compare yourself to other women getting divorced, because what's important for someone might not be important to you, and vice versa. For me, it was also important that I moved out. Some people, it's very important that they stay in their house, in their marital home, because that's what they can afford. That's what their kids are used to. And so everybody is different. So try not to compare yourself to others, and just do it your way.
Yeah, I love that.
Because everyone does divorce different.
For sure. I might even just add in life in general, just don't compare.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, FOMO is real. I get it. Yes. But sometimes you have to just say, you know what, this is what's right for me. And that might not be what's right for somebody else.
Exactly. And it takes work to get there. So it's not easy, but it'll come eventually.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Heather, so much for joining me. I appreciate your time.
This was so great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.